Hello, everybody. My name
Um,
is Tim Ottinger. You can see my name. It's over here. And I'm with John Borys. We're both of Industrial Logic. Borys, say howdy.
Hello.
So, John wrote an article. It's on the Industrial Logic blog site. It's called You're Doing TDD Wrong, and It's Probably Not Your Fault. So that's gathered a lot of interest. So it's a good time for a live event. So let's start off with a good question. How about this, John? Why did you write this article?
Oh, well, I was working for a client, and as you know, uh, clients usually want us to work with a whole bunch of teams, right? I was working with one and having some success. We were doing test-driven test-driven development and ensemble programming, and the team was really liking it. We were liking it, and they said, "Well, we can't wait for you to finish with this team before we start these other teams and all this goodness." And the TDD, the devs are raving about. So can you find some or send us some recommendations on computer-based TDD? And they had a contract with a large distributor of computer-based training. So I went and I checked out that, and then I checked out some videos on YouTube. Everywhere I checked, people were doing it wrong, right? And I'm like, well, if people are giving up on TDD because it doesn't work, it's no wonder if this is where they're learning it. My learning journey was far different. I didn't get it from computer-based training. I got it directly from mentors. So uh, looking through it, I just they were doing things like not running tests after every change. They would do a manual refactoring. One person was using an IntelliJ IDE, which is incredibly powerful refactoring, and it's the third step, right? It's red green refactor. It's a very important part of the cycle, and he was doing it all manually, and then he did not run the tests immediately afterwards. I do it most of the time whenever I have to do anything manually, and even sometimes with the automated refactorings, if it's something I don't do all the time or I can't see right away, like an inline option command, right? That it's pretty easy to see that it did the right thing. Um, but for the most part, I run tests after every change, and he wasn't doing this, and there were other things wrong as well.
Well, let's stay with that for just a second. Why does it matter to you whether they're doing it right or wrong? Are you like making sure they have the certified official technique, and if they don't do that, are they bad people? Or why does it matter?
Yeah, usually that means they're bad. No, it matters because if you're not doing it correctly, it becomes hard, right? It so doing it correctly takes discipline, which can be hard, but doing it incorrectly without the discipline, right, makes accomplishing your goal even harder, right? And so if you're just following the examples, right, and you make some changes in their minor changes, and you're thinking, I know what the next 2 or 3 steps are ahead, so I'm going to skip those steps and I'm going to go ahead. And you're not running tests after every change, and you make a few changes. Some of them maybe are manual, um, and then you decide, well, I haven't run tests in a while, which they actually say in some of the videos. It's time to run some tests. We haven't run tests in a while, and you run the test, and something's broken. Well, where did it break? And how long is it going to take you to hunt down? Maybe it's only 10 minutes, but I'm sorry. Look at that. We got a comment. Doing things
Oh,
incredibly
it's
might
okay.
make it
Well, I'll
worse.
watch those. You just continue. You're in a good flow here. So we talk about it being hard. I want to make sure is this isn't theoretical. I mean, did you experience that doing it the wrong way? Have you tried it the wrong way? Did you like it that way? Did doing it the right way make a difference for you?
Well, at first, I didn't want to do TDD, to be honest, right? Uh, I was perfectly content to get a specification, right? And we're talking, 25 years ago. But in the early 2000s, I was very happy to get a specification and put on my headphones and go to my cube and leave me alone and let me crank out some code, and I'll build whatever they slapped in front of me. Of course, I participated in the conversations, so I thought that they were more than sufficient. Um, the problem would be then the part where they're like, you have to write your test plan, and I would write a test plan in a Word document, and I hated it because it was so detached from the code. right? Because I was doing it in Word. I wasn't doing it. And then I'd have to share that with a QA person who would come back and then tell me all the tests that I wrote incorrectly. And there would be a back and forth until we agreed, right? Which was, in my opinion, a waste of time. I wish we could have just wrote the test together and been done with it instead of the back and forth. But I was perfectly content doing things that way. And when I tried TDD for the first time, it was actually at a startup, and there was a wonderful friend and coach, Stephen Starkey, who helped me out and paired with me and showed me how to do TDD. And the first thing, honestly, that amazed me wasn't the tests or even the product that we were developing. He was using this IDE, IntelliJ. At the time, I think I was using Eclipse, right? And I hadn't heard of IntelliJ. And when I saw him doing these really quick refactorings, and he never touched his mouse, and he was flying through the code while I was navigating, I was, just blown away. So I'm like, I want to do what you do with IntelliJ, number one, and number two, this TDD stuff. When we got through writing the code that we were writing, it was bug free, which I think was a combination of test-driven development and our pairing, right? It wasn't just one, but the product quality was so much higher than what I was used to writing. And then I went to another organization after that because it was a startup, didn't last too long. And it was a large trading company, and it kind of dropped it. I didn't do TDD for a while. And then I started coaching after a few years because as my career progressed, more and more people were asking me for help. Right, that happens as you all know. You've seen it. So I'm helping people, and a lot of people are asking how to do TDD. And as a coach now, I was very hesitant, right, because I didn't think I was that good at it. I didn't have a lot of experience, and so one of the clients I recommended to bring in Jeff Langer, who's wrote several books on it. He actually wrote one of those first books that he wrote, Agile Java. I bought, right, because I was a Java developer, still I'm a Java developer, and I didn't know Jeff, but except occasionally I'd seen him in a passing in a conference, and so we brought him in, and I took the class. Oh, apologize for that. I should turn that off. And I took the class, and it was great. But then when we tried to apply it to, because they were kind of trivial examples to keep things concise. When we tried to apply it to our code, it was a lot more difficult than it had seemed in the class. And so we kind of gave up on it, right? And then I still was hearing and reading all these things about, test-driven development, and I was kind of okay, and I'd taken some interviews and not passed, not been accepted, and so I started boning up and doing some of these things, these CBTs, and doing them wrong. Finally, I got hired by IL, and they put me with a big client, and people like you, right? Jeff Langer was one of them, ironically. Matthew Carlson and some other folks, Adil Ali. We were doing all this ensemble programming, test-driven development together. And at one point, Jeff took my mouse away and said, "You're driving. You're just using the keyboard, and put up on the whiteboard. We're going to read these shortcuts." So that and an IntelliJ thing, and then that helped me build up those skills, right? All those shortcuts and get the speed. But the main thing was we were doing a lot of refactoring and a lot of very small tests, atomic tests, right? And so I had been used to writing like multiple asserts in a test, and then when something went wrong, which assert broke, and where did I make that change and how did I fix it? Because again, I was doing things in kind of batches instead of micro tests, micro commits, and so basically I just learned how to do it a much better way, and all of a sudden everything became a lot easier. And the big part is they were coaching me or mentoring me on a very large code base at a real enterprise. It was vastly different from working with Jeff and the little TDD katas and stuff like that we did in his class. And that I think just took me to like a new level. I've been developing for like 15 years at that point, thought I was really, really, good. I'm good to go. I'm coaching it, right? I'm mentoring all these people. I must be pretty good because they hired me to do this and people like what I'm saying. But I don't think I was as good as I could be. And working with the folks at IL just really raised my game. This is what I call it, to the
Right.
next level.
For the listener, when we say IL, we mean industrial logic, in case you hadn't already made that connection. So it's really not bothering you that people are doing it the wrong way and they need to be corrected. It's really bothering you that the way they're doing it, they're not getting what they could have out of it. Their life isn't getting easier. Their work isn't getting better. It's what they're missing out on. It's not them being bad folks, right? We have a comment from FL. And it says, yeah, like trying to write all your tests before doing any code. That makes the feedback loop longer instead of shorter. And you were just talking about the back and forth with QA and how long it would draw out your work that you're trying to get done. And then here's this, write all the tests first before any code. It makes feedback longer. Is this, have you seen this in any of the instructor videos?
I saw this exact thing in an instructor video where they had all the tests written before and they were describing it as test-driven development. And so there's the very fundamental concept of test-driven development is it's not about testing. Testing is kind of a really nice byproduct. But what you're really doing is you're writing your own specification, the specification I talked about before, instead of going in and work, doing all this analysis and design and putting this thing in a Word doc and then handing it off to devs. You write the specification in your tests, right? You keep having the conversations, but the conversations are smaller. Now, instead of, the big upfront stuff, we're talking about one story that or one unit of work, one item that we want to deliver. And we're going to test drive that. So first we write a specification, but the big difference is the specification is in a test that lives with the code instead of a Word document that is obsolete 5 minutes after it's, shared.
Yeah, so I've also seen, by the way, these videos where they say, well, the first thing we do is write our tests. And they pull up a file where they've pre-written all the tests. I've actually never seen anyone successfully do TDD by taking and writing the entire test suite first. I'm not sure quite how I would even go about it. I have seen articles that suggested that that's what TDD is. I just want to throw it out here as somebody who's been in the industry for 45 years and who's been in the agile world of some sort since probably 96, 97. None of us did TDD that way. We didn't write everything first. On the other hand, by the way, I did see someone on one of the Slack channels that I'm in. They said that someone actually did write all of the high-level tests, BDD style, and hand that off as their requirement document. And they were actually implementing one BDD test at a time. John Kern is here. Hey, John Kern. Hey, you could estimate the entire project by writing all the tests up front. Of course, at that point, you're a third done with the whole project. So that's just wait for it. That's cool. Another LinkedIn user, though, has said that they found it more natural to follow TDD for backend languages, but have found it relatively hard to use for front-end frameworks like React and Angular. They wondered if you had any suggestions.
Well, I had the same impression, right? And it's, again, so I was with a client, very large insurance company, and they sent me down to Jacksonville, Florida to help their team do TDD better. And they were using React. I had, at that point in my career, I think mostly done, jQuery, Ember.js, Prototype, and Angular. I hadn't touched React. So I went to the hotel room and said, well, I better bone up on React tonight because tomorrow I'm going to be doing TDD with some folks. So I took this online CBT. And the first thing I noticed was they were driving out markup language, right? So they were using TDD to drive out HTML elements. And that's not what I would I'll talk about. First of all, it's the most fragile part of an application is, right? The one that changes the most, that breaks the most is the UI. And now I'm going to try and write tests that directly go to the implementation instead of the functionality. So that was a problem. So they're teaching me to test drive out markup. And what I really wanted to do was test drive out what the components that we're calling, what those things do, the actual business functionality. And I've also seen it misused. I also noticed John mentioned something about, trying BDD, right? And been there, done that. Another different large insurance company, when these big corporations tend to adopt some of these practices, they know enough to be dangerous, right? So they said, well, it's Gherkin. You can use given, when, then. You get scenarios. Scenarios, by the way, are not acceptance criteria, in my opinion. Those are two different things. But let's write all of our tests, all of our functionality in using BDD, drive it all through the front end. The first problem was the code had already been written, and now they wanted to apply BDD to a code that had already been written. So I think they kind of missed the boat on what the whole purpose of behavior-driven development was about. But when your boss tells you to do something, you do it, right? So we're going to try and put BDD, Gherkin cucumber test on top of this application, and it was a mess. It was a mess because we didn't drive it out. We weren't collaborating. All our tests were colliding. I don't think we ever got past 96% passing, because at the time, at least, I don't know if the technology has been updated because I don't do a lot of BDD. But at the time, there was no guarantee of the sequence of execution, right? And so people would have tests that tested different parts of the application. And we also had tests that turned off parts of the application. For instance, notifications if you're in a meeting, right? Mm-hmm. So those tests would almost always collide. One would pass this time and fail. The other one would fail, and vice versa, because they were colliding. And people just didn't know how to implement it properly.
Well, we said that, one of the problems we're seeing is that people are not given good instruction. By the way, I'm also digging into more front-end testing and React stuff. So I was watching a video the other day, and I saw the same kind of things you did. They started off with code already partly written, and then they end up deleting and starting again. But they would write 3 or 4 or 5 tests, all of them read, none of them working. They copy paste the tests until they get a bunch of failing tests. And then they go over into the code and they'd make a bunch of changes. And then they'd run the test to see if they messed anything up in the process. And I remember just sitting there going, dude, no. You one test, one fix, do one thing at a time, commit between, and you're always clear what you're about, right? You're not having to bounce between a bunch of ideas. But also I noticed when they did that, to them, refactoring meant you write the CSS so that it looks nice. And I was very confused by how did someone learn about refactoring and then decided that means styling the component. I couldn't make that connection. So my general rule is I test transformations and decisions, and where I'm not doing that. So I might write a rendering test to say, okay, if I pass this value to be true, it renders that element. If I pass it false, it doesn't. Of course. Element. That's logical. That's about.
Well, that's functionality. It's UI functionality, but it's a very common. It was what I was doing, right? So the one I was talking about was a pop-up notification, right? So they wanted every single pop-up notification in the application to be tested using BDD, every scenario. That's not, and they wanted it on the front end, right? So the Gherkin wasn't going to call like back-end code. It was calling front-end code. And to me, that just seemed ridiculous. We just need to know that the pop-up works, right? What's rendered inside the pop-up, what's delivered from the back end, the content, I can check that in a different layer. I don't need to check it in the UI.
Yeah, that's right. And that's an interesting point, that micro tests for TDD are slightly different kinds of tests than system tests are, or UI tests. So back to your observations. So give me some other the things you saw them doing wrong in the instructional videos. We talked about all the tests first. We talked about not bothering to run them, skipping the refactoring. Was there another big flaw that you saw?
Not using your IDE, I think, is kind of a sin, right? I mean, these guys teach these courses like they're writing a notepad, right, or some kind of text editor. If you're doing Java and you have IntelliJ, I know I've done React and Angular and other languages were not inside IntelliJ, the IntelliJ IDE, and the IDEs that go along with them, like Visual Studio, also done C#, right? So Visual Studio, VS Code, their refactoring is just not there. their automated refactorings. And even within JetBrains suite of projects, their other or products, I mean, their other products don't compare to IntelliJ in terms of refactoring. For whatever reason, I think because that was kind of their flagship product, that has all of the refactorings. And to not use those if they're available to you, I think is malpractice, right? So to watch this person just manually editing and the other thing that this yeah, very risky. And that brings to mind the other thing that I saw, which was leaving the test red, right? So the test is red, and then, oh, well, I'll go fix the code, right? And then run it. And no, that's not what you should do. What you should do is get back to your last green state, right? Try something else, and then run the test again. And again, we're talking about refactoring, right? So it should stay green. But if your test pass and then you do refactoring and your test fails, you go back to a passing test before you and then try different refactoring. And sometimes you find out that you can't unless you introduce what Bill Wake calls a paradox, right? Of duplication, which is you introduce duplication to remove it, right? And that's sometimes the only way you can keep your test green. Now, the first time somebody showed me this, it was a deal. I pushed back pretty hard. I'm like, why would I do that? This is just a couple of steps I have to take. And I know that the end is we're going to have the same result, but yours is going to take a lot longer because I have to do, duplication and stuff in parallel when I already know and can figure out in my head what those next 3 steps are. And a deal being a deal said, well, let's do an experiment. Let's do it both ways. Right. And so we did it both ways. And in terms of time, I didn't really, lose all that much time doing it the other way, a deals way, which is always staying green. But I learned that in the process, if this was a more complicated issue, boy, I would have some serious problems if I made a mistake in there somewhere and didn't know where it was made. Right.
Well,
so I learned
would be if you were doing exactly the way you were told and made a mistake and didn't know there was a mistake and you compounded it. And now it's like, well, I did the TDD and it didn't help me with scope management. It didn't help me with, there's a couple pieces in here that I want to get a comment up on screen. I know there's a bunch of them, folks. Thank you for all of your comments. Oops, I had it right in front of me just a second ago. By the way, John Kern again had said, as far as the testing side, which is, I'll take this detour for a minute. You have humans manually test what humans are good at testing. Let the machine test the boring stuff. One of the things I like to say is that all of your automated scripts can tell you that your code is broken, but they can't tell you that it sucks to use your program. That it's miserable, it's in the wrong order, things are in the wrong places. You shouldn't put this field before that one. It doesn't match the forms we use. It doesn't make sense to us. You're asking, the way you ask the question doesn't give me the answer that you're looking for, right? All of the user experience, your computer scripts can't know that. And I just wanted to drop that out there, but I wanted to focus again on the whole teaching of TDD element. Right. So let's go back to, well, do you think it's easy? So if you're going to make a video, and let's say you wanted to really quickly show people how to do TDD, do you think the constraints of making a video for new people have forced it to be poor tutelage? Do you think that maybe it's just not possible to make a short and clear TDD video? What do you think?
No. Well, first of all, these videos aren't short, right? I mean, they're long. They're quite extensive, and I could see one or two things. If you like one video I saw, the guy had production code already, right? You never write production code without a test, right? He had production code already. He said that, right? And then he made manual changes. He didn't run tests, and then he pointed out that he was doing it to save time, and then he showed you the right way, right, to do it, which is, but in my opinion, we'd already gone through like 20 minutes of him working with production code without a test, and then just a casual comment. I mean, he had plenty of time to do it right the first time. right? And by the way, the rest of the course was okay. It was pretty good, but
Yeah, I don't think anybody does a completely terrible job. I think people do
no.
well.
No, and I can always pick up bits and pieces. My go-to is the people I tended to watch are like Emily Bache and Wallen Falco and uh, you know people from our company, of course, and I've made some wonderful videos and stuff on it. So if you really hunt, I think you can find stuff that's right. But as to your question about making a video, is it no? Actually, we made one in Canada, right? Well, I was up there with a client with IL Canada, and for whatever reason, the recording didn't work, so we ended up not publishing it. But we did, a test-driven development along with the refactoring to, the problem was conditional complexity that we ended up with, refactoring that to, which we did to a strategy pattern. We did those two things in, like an hour. So I don't think it's all that complicated. Are you suggesting we make a video?
Maybe we should make. We actually did, by the way. Our company has an e-learning, online learning course. People have learned to do TDD well and correctly just off the instructional videos and the text that we have in our course. There's actually a blog from one of our people who learned it entirely from the course, and they've been doing a great job with it, and they've been getting all of the advantages. So I know that sounds like a commercial, but it has been done. People have made highly qualified.
And we're not the only ones, right?
What's that?
I said, and we're not the only ones. There's other folks out there.
Yeah, see what Emily Bache is doing. She's always doing great stuff. See what Llewellyn Falco's doing. See, Kent Beck puts stuff out still. I mean, he's got a whole book. There's lots of videos around that. But there's a point somebody made, and I want to just drop it up here real quick. And I just managed to walk right past it. They said that my goodness. Okay.
Well, there's a lot of comments. Wow.
There are a lot of comments. So it's enough that it scrolls by. I'll pop one up just a second. The comment was that, here it is, Matthew Lessing. Did I not say it? Yeah, Lysing maybe. I struggle with one thing at a time when build times become too long while unit testing. Is there a good rule of thumb? Matthew, there's a really nice, at least two different blog posts at Industrial Logic, one by myself called Make Testing Affordable, and one by Brett Schuhart on how long should a build take. Brett and I are also the people who invented the FIRST acronym for unit tests, and you might be familiar with that, where the F of FIRST stands for fast, and we mean really fast. And so you might find that to be useful. And also, there's a note here from Joshua Karyevsky.
I just want to say something before you bring up, reference to the last comment, right? If the build time's too long, your problem isn't TDD. you have architectural issues. Something is wrong, right? With the design.
Yeah, the microtest should be fast. By the way, Matt Heusser gathered a whole bunch of us, and he made an anthology article. It's called "Unclog Your Pipeline." Matt Heusser, Heusser, and a whole bunch of us put in. The build's too long. The tests take too long. Well, here's how we can shrink it down. But also, the micro tests that you use for TDD may not be the same as your Selenium tests and your rendering tests and your end-to-end tests, right? And when we're doing TDD, one of the things that we don't always see, sometimes in these videos, people are building Selenium tests to do TDD with. And it's just too slow. When you have to stand up your app and stand up a browser and stand up the services behind your app in order to test the UI, you're not going to get the full advantages. But let me show you Josh's real quick. He said, TDD training has been Netflixed, replaced with a large library of cheap, poor quality courses taught by non-experts, leading to poor practice. Learning and development managers love these cheap, huge libraries and buy site licenses. The result is we lose the awesome benefits of TDD. Would you say that matched your experience?
Yeah. There's a lot of crap out there. I don't know how else to put it. There's junk, but there are, obviously, if e-learning is what you want to do because you want to learn this. I learned a lot of stuff after hours, right? And so e-learning or computer-based learning is sometimes your only option. And sometimes, it's just pounding your head against the monitor and figuring stuff out, right? But yeah, there's some good courses that are out there, and amongst all the crap. So our e-learning is one of them. I'm sure people can find others, but it's hard to know because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Right.
And how do you navigate that as a new developer?
Yeah. By the way, Raphael, bless you, has been posting links to the articles as we mentioned them, which I think is really great. Thank you so much for doing it. Let's stay with this. So let's say you were new to TDD, or maybe you just realized that maybe you're doing it wrong. Maybe after listening to you or seeing your article, I thought, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not having a good time because it stinks. We're just doing it badly. If that's the case, what's your advice for finding a good mentor, learning how to do it well, quickly? How would you do that?
I know. I think I just got lucky meeting Steve and then meeting you guys, at IL. I've known you and Josh for 10 years before I joined the company, right? And the interactions I had with you guys, obviously influenced me. Reading, right? Which most devs like to do, read about what we do. I think the biggest thing is that prevents people from doing TDD and adopting it is delivery pressure, right? Because it's an unknown variable that you're adding, right? And anything that's unknown, people are mainly going to be afraid it's going to slow you down, right? So there's delivery pressure. And then there is, working with somebody else. Pair programs, except for a few places that do XP, I've had so many people say, "Oh, I'm too experienced. I don't need to pair program." It's just gonna. If I pair with him, he's just gonna slow me down, or I'm gonna have to spend too much time teaching her how to do stuff. And what these people don't realize, these senior devs, who, in my opinion, are shirking their responsibility to pass on our knowledge, right, to the next generation of developers, is they're forgetting that they'll learn by teaching. You'll learn more about the subject matter if you have to explain it to somebody else and show somebody else how to do it. I think coaching, technical coaching, because I'm not real big on things like Scrum or Safe, and even though I have certifications for that stuff, I don't, to me, it's not important. The technical stuff is what you ship is what matters, right? And you have to take pride in your craft. And when you have that delivery pressure and then the unknown, it's hard to expand the way you work. And TDD is a new thing for most folks.
I want to do a quick shout out. By the way, Scott Francis says that the course has been transformational for him. Also, there's a mention earlier, JB Rainsberger, another one that I would recommend. I think that
Never heard of him. Hey, JB!
Jason Gorman. There are quite a few. I think that if you can find people who have a reputation for TDD and refactoring, they're probably a better guest than someone who has a reputation for making videos. Or, hey, I've written 27, use Josh's language, Netflixed tutorials of TDD. Well, that doesn't, what is the reputation there, right? John Kern has a TDD example too. I would trust John Kern. So John is another one of the originals, right? We got to remember that 20 some odd years ago, this whole thing started with XP, right?
Yeah. Yes.
The test-driven development started there. There were 8 people in that group, and then there were 15 or 20 people who listened to them. I remember people arguing loudly that this can't possibly work. This is the dumbest thing we've ever heard of. And in fact, one of those people was Ron Jeffries. He was one of the first TDDers. He heard this idea when Kent came in and said, "Hey, I had this idea. The only way that we could do testing more intensely is if we wrote the test before the code." And this is the way I heard the story. It was Ron. It could have been Chet because it's the same system. One of them said, "That must be the most stupid thing I've ever heard. Let's try it."
I like the attitude of trying it.
It just doesn't sound like a good idea. But wow, all the things that happen, right?
No, but when you shift your way of thinking, right? So in the old days, like I said, we wrote a specification, right? We helped write that specification. We talked to people. We worked on our specs and what the functionality of the thing was going to do, and then you take a first thing and start working on that, right? Well, you're just writing a specification. You're just doing it in very small unit tests, And so when I go to look at a new piece of code, the first thing I do is go look at a test. I don't pay much attention to comments because they're often outdated, and documentation, unless it's telling me how to run the environment, is often outdated as well, and not as helpful as just looking at the test. Now, if you go to look at the tests and the tests don't run, so the first thing you have to do is execute them, right? Make sure they're running, and that they're quality tests. And because many teams I've coached have goals for code coverage, and they say they're doing TDD, but they're really doing TAD, test after development. And you start looking at the quality of the test, and you see things like assert not null, and that's it, right? And I don't know how helpful that is in determining whether or not what you built actually works. That you return an object, So,
Owen, by the way, had echoed your experience, and we talking about people are being trained wrong.
Yeah.
Early on, you had been trained by some pretty good. By the way, Jeff Langer has my full confidence as a teacher and as a coach.
He's awesome.
And you learned from him, but that didn't completely satisfy you either, because you then had trouble applying that. Owen talks about when you get to individual situations you don't know how to handle, you sort of get stuck and give up. That mirrors your situation, but you found other instructors too. You didn't learn from
and it's not just that. You're exactly right. I mean, Matthew Carlson was a big help for me, a deal, as I said, my coworkers, right? And your coworkers can do the same thing. The point is, it's impossible to retain all the knowledge there is on all these topics. But if you pair up, or better yet, get two people, I got a deal in the room and Jeff in the room, and we're working on this incredibly messy, big ball of mud, right? And we want to refactor it, right? Where do you start? I don't know, but talking to the other two gentlemen in the room helped us figure out where to start. And then whenever one of us got stuck, somebody else was there with a suggestion. I don't think there's a better way to develop good, clean, modular code than working with other people and using TDD to drive it out. Now, that doesn't mean I use TDD for every single thing. Somebody made a comment earlier, and they're absolutely right about, humans should test what humans are good at, machines what machines are good at. Exactly. I can't see writing tests for CSS or for markup or anything like that when I can tell in an instant if something's out of line if I pull up the web page, right? Or open the application and look on my phone. I can see if something's wrong. And I don't need automated tests for that. But working together and using TDD is I didn't really start doing it full time on production code until I was 15 years deep into my career. And I can't think about, I can't imagine going back to doing it the other way.
Yeah, I didn't start until I was 20 years in, but that's when they invented it. So
I've only been doing this for 25. You got 20 on me.
So a couple different elements, and I want to get us to a wrap up because I know that we're over time. But one of the points is, tutelage is just not that good. And a lot of them are doing things that aren't really TDD anyway. I think that they had pressure to build a video more than they had the urge to teach people to do a great job. But number two, we found that it may be that your first two teachers, even if they're very good, 1, 2, 3 teachers, however many, maybe they don't lock it down for you. Maybe that's not when it clicks. It has something to do with maybe, when you're able to apply it into your actual work. And it's like, well, if it's that hard to acquire, is it worth acquiring? We have also this from Paul Holzer. He says he remembers reading TDD by example and thinking, how come we haven't been working this way before? And why wouldn't anyone want to start working this way? It's true from this side, right? On this side of that mountain, it's like, why would you not do this? This is like the greatest way of working. It's so easy. when you're doing actual production work, not discovery, I do a lot of discovery and REPLs, right? You do. But when you know what you want and you're building, it's such a great way of building. It has so many benefits. It allows you to design by refactoring. It gives you safeties. It gives you all the opportunities to save your work, to survive interruptions, the ability to focus on one thing at a time and really bring it to fruition. All of that wonderful power, when that finally clicks, and maybe it's not people's fault that they're not getting that benefit, when maybe they've not had the best teachers and then not the best choices. What would your advice be going forward? We'll let you give some closing words, and I think we're going to have to wrap just because of the time.
Okay. Well, the reason I joined IL was because I was crossing paths with these people who were doing things that way, like he mentions in this comment, right? And they're kind of my tribe, right? So I thought, I want to be part of that, because we're going out and not just talking about story point estimation or how to write the proper user story or how to split stories or all that stuff that I now see is a lot of waste. We were actually going and working with them on the product, right? So I got to keep coding. I get my hands on the code, writing code. I take a turn. It's production code that ends up in production for the client. They know this. They're fine with this. The company I was at before this was like, you could go help them and help them with TDD, but don't touch the keyboard, right? Well, we have a different arrangement. So we work hands-on. Not only is that enjoyable for us, but it's incredibly enjoyable for the people you work with, as long as I'm nice, as long as I'm not a jerk.
This is it's enjoyable. It's profitable way of working. You get better results, but you need to find a better teacher. You just may need to find a better teacher. If yours doesn't,
the results tell you everything, right? So for me as a dev, before I was a coach, it was, how can I get rid of pain? Stuff I don't want to do, right? And one of them is going back and forth with QA, right? Another one is going back and forth with another team member, right? So we changed that with the pairing and mobbing. And then fixing bugs. I hated getting an email a week after I worked on code saying, there's a bug, here's a bug, ticket number, whatever, and it's on something I worked a week or two ago, and it's a high priority, and I have to switch context to go back and fix that, and then come, when we're doing TDD and you're mobbing and pairing, you don't deal with that stuff. So that's, for me, that was the motivation. Make my life easier and make my boss happier because we're producing quality products.
And I think that's probably a good note to leave this on. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thanks for all the great comments and for the links and all the good things you've done. We'll see you for the next one. Take care.